What we're going to do is go into the 12-step goal-setting formula that essentially changed your life, and it certainly changed my life. And I've learned a lot of things along the way about goal setting, and so it can vary, per person, but what their experiences are. But goal setting can be a myriad of topics. But I'm going to share with you the 12-step formula that I've learned and how it literally has changed my life. So let me share a little bit about that with you right now. I've decided to also do a couple things here, is go into detail with some stories to make it more real. So I could either make it real short and quaint and it wouldn't have as much impact, or I could go into some of it and give a lot of personalization and make it real. And so that's what I've decided to do. I'm going to share a lot of personal stories with you along all of these concepts and how they impacted and affected me, and how it can affect you. It might be a little bit more real to you. So having said that, let's go ahead and get started. And this is accumulation of information of goal setting from years. A lot of books, seminars, tapes, studying, experiences, everything. But I will share with you, it all started, the achievements with my life all started with a positive foundation. And I was a little kid running around, and I remember my father always used to listen to Zig Ziglar on cassette tapes, and he'd play them out loud as I'm a little kid running around. So I heard a lot of positive things. In other words, my life was filled with what you can do, not with what you can't do. As a matter of fact, I only remember one time, and I see this as so unbelievably important. I remember only one time my father ever saying anything negative to me, one time, and that was when I drove home on a motorcycle. And he said, "Son, I thought you were smarter than that," which would be common for a parent when a son comes home on a motorcycle. But that was it. Everything about the rearing I had, the impact, the imprinting, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I was imprinted with Zig Ziglar, and that you can do. All of that stuff that is with a can-do attitude. So having said that, let's go through a lot of these stories and how we can personalize it, not just to a practice, but to your life. And these are the very strategies that I use today in everything I do. And so let me just share with you where I came from and where I went as a result of these 12-step strategies. So I started off in a low-income family. So we had 5 kids in our family. I'm the youngest, and we were definitely middle, lower class. My father was military enlisted, retired, so he only had a retirement check. He did he was a realtor after he retired, but he never made any money as a realtor. He was not a good realtor. My mother was a maid. So I remember we lived in the 70s. We lived in a nothing more than a 1,300, 3.2 square foot home with a basement, and our bedrooms were in the basement essentially. I remember we had I remember only getting one pair of jeans new when I was raised. One pair of jeans, that's it. Now the family tree, there's no college education. Matter of fact, my father was a high school dropout. My mother didn't go to college either. Very blue-collar family. No self-employed or business experience. My first job was at 15 years old. So if anything, coming from a blue-collar family, we definitely learned a work ethic. That's a fact. I paid for my own car, paid for my own education. I remember only receiving a little bit of money from my parents all the way through college. So I went through 9 years of college, undergraduate, graduate, got an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, doctorate degree, 9 years of college, and I paid for it all, either by myself or student loans. And then I always worked when I was in college. I never took student loans and took time off and didn't work. I always used work part-time to pay for my room and board, and then especially in graduate school, I'd use student loans to pay for graduate school so I wouldn't come out as deep in debt. So paid for my own education, worked 2 summer jobs in high school. So instead of taking the summer off, I worked 2 summer jobs. And then worked part-time in college. I talked about that. And then I played football, basketball, and baseball all through high school. hold the high school football career reception record. So I was very athletic, which created a lot of competitiveness, good work ethic. I didn't know it at the time, but turns out that I developed a pretty decent work ethic as, again, being imprinted. So anyway, this was the background. So I definitely did not come from a silver spoon. So with this background, where did that take me? Well, I was able to do these things with the 12 steps that I'm getting ready to share with you. And these 12 steps were accumulated and piecemealed over time between books, seminars, tapes, and experiences. And I'm going to point out some very detailed information, and especially information that's unbelievably important, that if you kind of don't do, I found out that you pretty much will not attain what you want in life. There's a few unbelievably important concepts. So what are some of the achievements that I've done? I've opened 77 offices in 20 states. We averaged over 600,000 patient visits annually. I was the largest chiropractic provider in the world. Nobody in the chiropractic profession has done that. My gross collections were over $60 million a year. I personally made over $1 million a year, had over 300 employees. I retired at age 33, and that's when I found out real quickly that retirement is not good. It's very good to be active. I only practiced full-time for 7 years. I didn't have to after that. So I practiced for 7 years, and then I had 2 associate doctors. I practiced part-time for 2 more years, so I only practiced 9 years. And I was a speaker in 3 chiropractic colleges, donated over $500,000 to chiropractic, so I'm in the top 1% of the profession with donating. I was awarded Logan College President's Award. That's the highest award for an alumni for a college. I've authored 10 books now. I've got my scuba certification, my private airplane pilot's license qualified, and I just recently finished my boat captain's license qualified. So all of these things happened as a result of these 12 steps that I'm getting ready to share with you moving forward. So let's go ahead and go into these 12 steps. So number one, and I tell this to everybody, the very first thing you have to do is you have to have a passion for what you want to do. That is the single most important thing that you can do. And it's worst to best motivation. So passion will take you places, and it'll help you overcome so many obstacles that you will not overcome if you don't have a passion for it. That alone becomes so important. So when we look at why we do things, you can see right here it says there's money, personal gain, conviction, or duty. Well, money, people think that money is why people will do stuff, and that's not true at all. It totally depends where the person is at on the social economic ladder. So money is a great motivator only if you're in the survival or security mode. So we're going to pay attention to Maslow's hierarchy of needs with natural human motivation. And it's so unbelievably important to understand where you are, because where you are relative to Maslow's hierarchy of needs is directly relevant on what you should do. So somebody who's in survival will do something totally different than somebody who's in self-actualization. It's unbelievably important to understand this. So when somebody's in survival, there doesn't need to be any motivation. And money is very important because it takes somebody out of survival and it creates physical security. It's a very low motivator, and it becomes a major problem, and I found, once the doctors have enough money to feel comfortable. So what happens, I found, is there's unbelievably natural motivation when somebody perceives themselves, and by the way, it's their self-perception of survival or security. Their self-perception. Very important concept. So, because, well, we'll go into that a little bit more, but the motivation is very natural to get people to do things when they're in survival security for the average American. But now it becomes detrimental. Once somebody has attained survival and security, it now becomes a major limiting factor to challenge that security, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. And that becomes the #1 inhibitor in life. And knowing how this works and how to overcome it becomes unbelievably important. And so that's why when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the socioeconomic ladder, where do you see the bell curve of people? You see them right outside of survival, over survival and just outside of security. That's when everybody kind of putzes out. So they'll push, 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 and then they kind of putz out there when things are kind of safe and secure. Because now we don't want to challenge our second highest need in life, which is security, which becomes a whole nother issue. And I'll go into that in just a second. And this becomes especially important for self-motivation, self-awareness, is being aware of where you are in these different phases and steps, because understanding where you are will determine on what steps you should do next. So if somebody's in survival, as an example, as a mentor and a coach, if I have somebody who's in survival, I don't worry about motivation. If I have somebody who's just outside of survival and security, I put a lot of attention on motivation, because it's all gone, and now they have, essentially, they have the natural aspect of self-preservation creates a major psychological glass ceiling, and it's unbelievably real to that person. So that's number one. Okay, so, and I'll kind of use chiropractors as an analogy, because I work with chiropractors in a chiropractic practice, but this applies to everything. When we talk about human nature, it applies to everything. So, so when I have a, as an example, I have a chiropractor come to me for consulting advice, and they're just starting their practice and they're in survival. That's the easiest client to work with. He's going to pretty much do what I say. And then what happens as soon as they start making a six-figure income, get out of survival and security, now I've got real problems motivating, because the motivation, the natural motivation's gone. Those are some of the hardest people to coach, are the people that are just out of natural human motivation. So it's a totally different strategy that's used to get them to do what they need to do to go past being average, because that'll take you to average and that's it. So the next one's personal gain. We'll do things for personal gain, but it's very short-lived. Once personal gain is achieved, motivation stops. So that's not a very good motivation. It's very short-lived. The next one's conviction. And conviction is when you have a personal experience, it's purpose-driven, strong motivation, and it can last forever. So an example of that is I became a chiropractor. This is one of the things I look at when we hire associate doctors, is I go, well, what's their conviction level? And the reason is when you have a higher conviction level, you'll overcome a lot more obstacles, and you'll crush barriers. You'll go over barriers, through barriers, under barriers, and around barriers when you have conviction. And when you don't, a lot of times these little barriers will just stop you, and you'll quit. You'll quit in the game of life. So conviction becomes important. Now, conviction happens essentially in two ways. Either you have a personal experience. An example like that is, how I became a chiropractor. I slipped and fell when I was 15 on my tailbone. I couldn't sit down, went to the medical doctor for 3 months, wasn't getting any better. They had me sit on an inner tube. Finally went to a chiropractor, and in 3 visits, 1 week, I was totally fine. I could sit down, I could do everything, go back to play sport. Well, that was a very personal experience happening. And it was close to the survival mode. Being able to sit down becomes a very, very important function in life. Go ahead and try not to sit down for a few days and see how that works out. So it was a very deep personal conviction level, because there's different degrees of conviction. So that's like another example that I give is, prior to Michael J. Fox being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, how much time, money, or energy did he spend with Parkinson's research? 0. Well, now it became a personal experience, and so now he's like the major spokesperson for Parkinson's disease. So it's you either have a personal experience or it's learned. So when I took in associate doctors that did not have high conviction, we did a lot of education. We did a lot of training with education to increase the conviction level. And that happens in all kinds of categories. You know, another example I give is like religion. Some people find religion. You know, they hit bottom and then bam, they find religion fast. Okay, that's a personal emotional experience with pain-based trauma. And another way is people slowly become educated. You know, they'll go to church and maybe be around people more, and maybe they'll do a Bible study. And then next thing you know, 1, 2, 3 years later, they've built a significant conviction. And so it was learned. Okay, so that plays a major role. And then, of course, there's a sense of duty, which is the highest calling, higher calling than self-preservation, such as your God, your children, or your country. That's when you'll do things. That's when you'll do them not because of the money, not because of conviction or personal gain. You don't care about personal gain. And now it's outside of you. It's for a bigger cause, God, country, your kids, things like that. So that's why finding your passion on a sense of duty scale is so important for the success and happiness. When setting goals, you're always trying to find and attach it to the inner sense of duty. So when I specifically work with clients, I'm always trying to find out where their passions are and match that to the goal setting. Because I pretty much, and this is a major concept of goal setting, that you pretty much will not attain your goals if you're out of survival security and you have no passion for it. Most of the time, people will not even start. They'll just dream. Those are called dreamers. They're not goal getters or goal setters. So, and you don't have to have a passion particularly for this particular event, but it's easy to connect something that is valuable to you to that event. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times I'll connect new doctors once they start making money and their personal drive goes away. And they're living in an apartment complex, maybe with their wife and kids, and going to public schools, and maybe they're not living in the nicest of neighborhoods. Well, those are all pain motivators. Do you want to live, do you want to rent the rest of your life? Do you want your kids growing up in rental properties? Do you want your kids going to public school? Do you want your kids socializing and being influenced with middle, lower class mentalities and thinking? All these things matter because they're all imprinting your kid. So a lot of times I'll tie that to what we're trying to do with their practice when their natural motivation is gone. See, that's an example of tying passion to something that you would not naturally have a passion for, and being able to now get it done. So that's another example. That becomes very important. Now, passion changes with experience also. You know, who you are now is not the person you're going to be. You know, what I want in life now at my age is vastly different than I wanted 20 years ago. You know, I value my freedom and time way more than I do money now. When you're younger and you're coming up the ladder, you know, you're still trying to make money and buy the big house and all the material stuff. And well, we're done past that. I would much rather have freedom and my time than to go, you know, open another office or make another $100 or $1 million. That's more valuable. So that will change. That will change, and it should change. It's, you know, it has to do with maturity and growth. So when we do goals, it's just for that particular time in your life. So when I write my goals out, you know, it's just for that window of where I'm at in my life. A lot of times, when I redo my goals every year, I look at my past goals and I go, well, how many did I meet? And I check them off. Then I go, how many did I not meet, but I still want to meet? Well, I'll move them over into the next year. And then I'll look at some goals and I'll go, I don't want to do that. You know, and I remember one goal I had was when I was younger, I wanted to run a marathon. I thought, you know, that'd be something. That was one of my bucket list things. I'd like to run a marathon, you know, say that I did that. Well, I put it on my list, and it was year after year, I never did it. Well, finally, I just took it off my list. Well, 15 years later, I put it back on for different reasons, different motivations, for health reasons and things like that. And within 12 months, I ran a marathon, see? So life changes what you want with experiences, what becomes valuable to you. So having said that, survival, I talked about, is the absolute best motivator. That's why I say when I get somebody out of school that's just getting started, They're the easiest people to work with because they have they have self-motivation. I'll tell you a couple other common motivations that I get is a doctor will be practicing and they'll be doing averages, like they're saying 80 visits a week, maybe their wife is working or something. And then as soon as their wife has the first kid and doesn't want to work anymore, I get a phone call. Because now that doctor does not have a second income and his costs are going to go up. That is a very common reason that I get a phone call as a consultant. Now that doctor wants to get off his butt and get his practice built up and stop messing around at 80 visits a week. Another common example is doctors are cruising along with a good income. Maybe they're seeing 130, 150 visits a week. They're making $150,000, $250,000 a year, and they get divorced. And they just lose half of it just like that. They get wiped out. That's another phone call. In other words, they went from total acquiescence into a state of homeostasis, and they got thrown into survival. That's another phone call I get. See, those are all natural motivators. It's pretty rare to have somebody who's doing well but still wants to do better. And I'll explain that person in just a second. That's a go-getter. That's only about 20% of the population. And I found that there's very specific reasons why that does happen. So survival. So as an example, I talk about here low volume practitioners will do more unless there's internal motivation. I'll go into the different types of motivation, from circumstantial motivation, external motivation, and internal motivation, what the difference is and how to approach them. Understanding the different three types of motivation is unbelievably important in everything in life, from hiring staff members to patient motivation to doctor motivation. It's unbelievably important. So doctors making good money will typically be willing to do the least. I've found that. Single doctor, as an example, I had a doctor who was seeing about 100, 120 visits a week, and his wife, he had two kids, and his wife was a nurse, but his wife had to work to live in the nice house that they wanted to live in the nice neighborhood. Otherwise, if she didn't work with her decent income, and him seeing 120, they would not have been able to live in a middle upper class neighborhood. Well, so he was willing to do a lot more because of that pain-based motivation, and so he did. And boom, we took his practice right up. He increased his practice $300,000, $400,000 a year. She stops working. She's raising the kid now. So, and then, of course, what happened with that doctor when that happened? Well, the motivation was gone. So it took a whole other year and a half for him to get back in the loop, understanding that he was no longer in the pain-based motivation cycle. And so he couldn't think like that because that was gone. He had to think totally differently from a pleasure motivation standpoint. And we're going to cover that here also. And so that's what we did. So how I dealt with him when he was in pain was very different than after he was in abundance. There were two totally different ways of communicating and interacting and goal setting with that doctor. One would not have worked. So single doctor making a six-figure income, no motivation becomes a huge problem. Doctor just getting started in practice, trying to get out of the survival, is highly motivated, will almost do anything. The most disposable income you can make, the more it takes you to get out of natural motivation of survival, and kills motivation. So people think it's about money. I'm like, no, money kills motivation for 80% of the people. As soon as you get out of survival security, most people just kind of stagnate. So doctors, that was like me. As soon as I started making $100,000, $200,000 a year, well, all my peers stopped. Next thing you know, they're doing this and this and that, and I keep growing my practice. I keep adding associates. I keep adding another office or two. I keep buying real estate. And I'm like, why is it that I keep pushing and they all quit? Well, we'll go into that in just a second. It's the difference between circumstantial motivation, external motivation, and internal motivation. So doctors with high internal motivation keep pushing regardless of money. Doctors with no internal motivation and good income just must know and follow the proven steps to get out of security. So And you have to follow and be aware of and know these steps. So if you're out of survival and you're out of security and you do not have what's called imprinted internal motivation, that's when doctors are stagnant. You know, they'll make $100,000, $250,000 a year. They'll live a good lifestyle. They'll have a nice house, nice car. They'll be able to eat out. They got to go back to work the next day, and they typically don't have any residual or passive income. So they're just living a good life for the moment, and that's it. So having said that, let's move forward here. So we got to pay a lot of attention to that. So that's number one. Number one is passion. So number two is you have to be specific with what you want. So many times, here's the rule. The more general you are with goal setting, the less likely you're going to attain it, period. So obviously you're not going to attain anything at all if you don't come up with what you want. And unfortunately, so many doctors do not even write down or have goals. They have dreams. They have these vague, nebulous dreams. That's not goals. And so they're never met. And that's, to be honest with you, that's most people. They have dreams. They don't have goals. Because they never get specific with what they want for different reasons. So the very first thing, one of the first things we need to do is we need to get specific. You got to go, well, what do I want? Well, sometimes that's difficult for people to, when people are in survival or security, it's easy. I want this house, I want this car, I want this neighborhood, I want to be able to take my kids and put them in this school system because it's a better school system. See, that stuff's easy. But once you're out of that, now most people haven't thought past that. And they stagnate. They don't put anything on the board. They're not specific at all. And next thing you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years goes by and nothing's changed. They've had a good life. They've lived a good life, but they have nothing and they still got to go back to work Monday. So the more general, that's why when I talk with clients, I'll say, well, have you any goals? They go, no. I go, okay, we got to start somewhere. Then I go, I'll listen for how specific the goals were. If they're very vague and general, I know it's crap. They're worthless. So we've got to be very specific, whether it's a car, a house, whatever it is, it's got to be, which includes the how, when, where, why. That's how you get specific. So an example, let me share with you some examples. I initially when I got into chiropractic, I did not know how much a chiropractor made when I was a freshman in chiropractic college. I did not know. I did know that my chiropractor that I went to that helped me when I was 15, he talked about his pool in his backyard. So I figured, and nobody I knew in my small town of 3,000 had a pool in their backyard. So I figured if you got a pool in your backyard, you must be making a decent amount of money. That's the only thing I could think of relative to money. And then I remember my freshman year in chiropractic college, there was an article that was sent out that listed the average income for professionals, like healthcare professionals. And I still remember, this was in 1984, it listed the chiropractic income of $116,000. And I'm like, whoa, well, my dad made $27,000 a year during that time. So $100,000 was huge. A six-figure income was like, whoa. And I'm like, man, I'm so glad I got into this profession as a byproduct. I mean, I got into it because for conviction reasons. I was hurt and I was helped. I wanted to help people, but I'm like, it's kind of nice to know you're going to get in a profession that has the potential to do well. So that was pretty exciting. So when I got into practice, did I want to open 77 offices in 20 states and retire at age 33? No, that was never part of my plan at 25 years old. So my idea when I started my practice is I thought, well, if I could see 100 patient visits a week and make a six-figure income, that'd be good. That was my ceiling. That was my psychological ceiling. Well, then when I met it, then I shifted it. Fortunate for me, I just didn't stay there. Then I thought, well, let's do 150 and let's shoot for 250,000. And then I did it. Then I go, well, let's shoot for 250 patient visits a week and let's shoot for $500,000 a year. Then I did it. And then I go, well, let's shoot for, one associate doctor and work part-time. Well, then I did. So you see, every time I had the goal and I met it, I shifted my reality. I didn't just stay stagnant. And I kept doing it. And because these were in place and I had a system to do it, it happened real fast. And that's what happens with goals when you use these formulas. It's unbelievable how fast they happen. It's scary how fast it happens. So then the third office, and then I was making $1 million a year. Then I trained then I would train 2 doctors at a time. Then I would train 4 doctors at a time, and then 5. And then I was training 7 doctors every 6 months. I was opening 14 offices every year. Did I ever plan on doing that? No. But I never limited myself. So once I hit this goal, I readapted, readjusted. I put all these systems in place, all these goal setting systems in place, got specific with it, and refocused. And boom. And it happened quicker than I thought. And then I just did the same thing. And then that's how it kept going up, 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 and up. But never in my wildest dreams did I ever anticipate opening 77 offices in 20 states, being the world's largest chiropractic provider ever. But I never limited myself. So with each goal, I include the plan and the timeline. So when I would write these goals down, I had a little plan in place. I'm like, okay, if I wanted to make $500,000, I reverse engineered it. I go, okay, what do I need to do? You know, if my overhead's 50%, so that's $1 million, I got to make $1 million at 50% overhead to have 500,000. And then I just divided all the numbers. What's my patient retention? What's my dollar per visit? I'm going, okay, what marketing do I need to do to get this number of patients at this dollar per visit? See, I just reverse engineered, which gave me the little baby steps that I needed day to day to hit that mark. And that's, you know, a major component. So reverse engineering, we'll talk about here as we move on, but it's unbelievably important to attaining your goals. Reverse engineering with baby steps is unbelievably important. So in 5 years, I had 35 offices and 2 associate doctors from the date that I opened my office. Now, let me say this before I move on. When I came out of school, I didn't know anything about business. I wasn't raised in business, nothing. So I was supposed to take over a practice, and I failed. I didn't know how to get patients, keep them. I didn't know anything. I absolutely failed on my face. Then I went to work for a chiropractor who actually knew business. And he trained me in the basic business concepts. There's more to the story, but this is the short story. So I worked for him for a year, but he was kind of forced to train me the business concepts. I wasn't just there treating patients. Well, now I learned a lot of basic business principles. So when I finally went out the next year, in 6 weeks, I met my overhead and profit. I profited my first month in business now and made over a 6-figure income my first year in practice after having failed 2 years prior to that. And the only difference was knowledge and skill. That was it. That window, that 1-year window of actually being trained, that was the only difference. So my point is, from the time that I actually knew what I was doing, in 5 years, I had 35 offices. In 9 years, I had 77 offices in 20 states, doing about $60 million a year. And it was all from these steps. All of these things I'm covering, relative to goals, is exactly how it happens. So, having said that, the third major component is you got to write it down. This is unbelievably important. One of the first things I'll ask, there's a few key components relative to goals, and this is number one, and this is why. If you haven't heard of the Harvard study, you got to write it down. Whatever it is you want, you have to write it down. And there was a Harvard study in 1971, after 10 years, 80% of the students who did not write their goals down, 80% had no goals. The 10% made twice the income as the 80% who had no goals. The 10% who wrote down their goals made 10 times more money. Writing down keeps accountability. There's something, writing it down. Here's the deal. There's a lot of psychological things that happen for you to write a goal down. There's a lot of people that aren't willing to write it down because there's a whole nother commitment level when you write something down. And so here's the bottom line, what I found out. You have like a 97% chance of never attaining your goals if you don't write it down. So one of the first questions I ask if I'm dealing with a client, I go, do you have goals? A, how specific are they? Did you write them down? I already know that if they did not write them down, they're called dreams. They're called pie in the sky dreams, and they're never going to happen. That's what I definitely know. This is the power of writing it. I already know when I, Paul Holler, do not write down my goals, it is not going to happen, and it's pure BS that I'm telling myself if I think it is. I believe, in other words, I already accept past history and how it works. I don't have to be part of that 80%. I don't have to experience like the 80% of those graduate students did. I can be that 10%. So writing it down becomes unbelievable, imperative, and important relative to going to the next step. It doesn't matter what you do. So I'll give you an example here. Is all my goals are written down on legal. I just take the legal pad and I write stuff down. You know, I don't get crazy about this stuff, but I do write it down. I'll have a legal pad and I'll have everything that I want to do that year, and then there's like short term and long term. I'll break it up. But all of them are written down. Legal pad is where I keep, it's where I keep my keys in my wallet, so I see them every day. So I keep my keys in my wallet in the same location, and I keep the legal pad there every day so I see it. And this is also very important. Quarterly, I review them quarterly. I don't just leave them there. I don't just hide them. I'm forced to see them. And then every quarter, and it's usually more often than a quarter, I'll pick them up and I'll look at them and read them and go, okay, where am I at? How far along am I with each of these factors? Okay? And then each year I cross off what I've attained, keep a list to focus on. I remove from the list that's not a value for me anymore, because maybe my values have changed. But I will tell you, in my experience, 80% of what I write down to do in 1 year gets done. It's that high. It's literally that high using these formulas. So writing down your goal is, in other words, I'll just ask somebody, a client, I'll say, did you write it down? They say no. I already know we're not dealing with reality. That's what I do know, period. That's how important writing it down is. That's one of the keys. If you don't write it down, nothing else matters. It's not going to happen. Number 4, there's got to be a timeline and a date line. Too much time, and this is a very common mistake. Too much time decreases motivation. Too short a time is not realistic. So this is kind of tricky. It's a realistic time frame with micro steps. So I'll give you an example. Doctors say they want to do X and give themselves a year without a timeline or micro steps. So I'll give you an example. Like I had one doctor, he goes, I want to increase my practice 50 visits. It's at the beginning of the year, and he wants to increase his practice visits, 50 visits a week. And he's going to give himself 12 months. 12 months. Now, he doesn't know any better, but that's called ridiculous. Not that it can't happen. It should happen in less than 90 days. He's not going to do anything for 11 months. There's not going to be any motivation. His back's not going to be against the wall at all. And he didn't have a plan to do it. He didn't have micro steps with a plan to do it. In other words, it was just pie in the sky. And he was given way too much time. I said, that's ridiculous. I said, nothing's going to happen until November, and then you're going to look at it, and by then it's going to be too late. You're just going to chuck it. I said, we don't have to wait 11 months to figure out this isn't going to work. I said, this needs to happen in 90 days, not in a year. And there needs to be a 90-day plan, step to step, for it to happen. I said, this can happen in 30 days with some intensity, but easily in 90 days. See? So sometimes it takes a little bit of awareness of somebody else to help put things in perspective, because he thought 50 visits was a lot to improve for him because he hadn't done it in 10 years. You know, he was practicing at 100 visits a week for 10 years. So for him, you know, increasing his practice 50 visits to him was like this Herculean psychological event. So it was real to him. But what I was doing is getting real with him. I'm like, no, you're not going to do anything for 11 months and then you're going to chuck it anyway. So this timeline, so many people either won't put a timeline on it because they don't want to be pushed. They don't want their back against the wall. And that's the best thing that can happen to you. That's one of the best motivators, is to feel like your back's against the wall. And then the other problem is they just put it out there too far. So they either don't put a timeline on it, or they put it out there too far, and nothing ever happens. So whatever it is, it's got to be realistic. It's got to be within this time frame. There's got to be some short steps to get to it. You can't just put it out there. Now, there's some things that might be a 5-year plan. If you want to retire and not practice again, you go, well, I wouldn't mind not practicing within 5 years. Well, you can do that in 1 year if you wanted to. It's pretty easy to bring on 2 associate doctors within 1 year and not have to practice. So it depends on, again, what you do and don't know relative to these time frames. But this timeline and deadline thing is unbelievably important. You have to have a deadline. It's got to be a timeline, and it can't be too far out. That's a key component relative to getting things done. Number 5 is another unbelievably important: micro steps. One of the best ways to have huge negative rejection is try to do too much, and the defenses and resistance are too much, and then it stops the person from moving forward. So they have a negative feedback loop when they try something because they tried to do too much, and they have a negative feedback, and so they don't even try it again. This happens so much. I'll give you an example in chiropractic. This is a real classic example with like prepaying patients. You'll have somebody that'll, finally start to do a prepay. They're not comfortable with it. They're not talking money, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll do prepay, and they're not good at it. But next thing you know, they're asking for way too much, and they're not even good at it. So they're not good at it, and they're asking for way too much. Well, what's that setting yourself up for? Well, that's naturally setting yourself up for failure, rejection. And then you go, well, how much negative feedback can you get before you're just going to quit? And then what are the 2 most common things people do when they have negative feedback and they quit? Here's what they don't do. They don't say, I'm the problem. You won't hear that. You'll hear that from go-getters and winners. Here's what you'll hear, and I call them losers. It'll be rationalization and justification. In other words, it'll be blaming everything else except themselves. Well, that person is guaranteed to stay the same, period. When you rationalize and justify anything in life, you're absolutely guaranteed for that to stay status quo, period. That's just not acceptable when we talk about being a winner. Rationalization and justification is just not even acceptable. Okay. So micro steps become unbelievably important. Micro steps. Trying too much guarantees failure. Too much. So this is why breaking down the goal into multiple steps becomes unbelievably important. So like that example I was given, if a doctor wanted to increase his patient visits 50 visits a week, am I going to try to go from 100 to 150? No. I'm going to break it down to maybe 120, 100, like 3 different steps. Maybe go to 115, 135, 145. See, that's kind of, I'll break it into 3 different steps, not 1. And it'll be much easier to take them from 100 to 115, and 115 to 130, and 130 to 145. See, those will be very easy to do psychologically. Everything about this is psychological. It's understanding how to overcome your psychological subconscious inhibitions. That's what goal setting is. So there has to be a tremendous amount of insight into human nature and yourself, but specifically human nature. So break down micro steps in a timeline. So that's what we do. We just do timelines. We go, okay, here, what do you want? And then we reverse engineer it and put a timeline on it. And then we do micro steps. Unbelievably important. So to increase patient visits, take the number to increase it, the timeline to increase it, divide the patient retention to find the number of new patients necessary, create a marketing plan within the timeline to create the new patients necessary to meet the patient visits. See, it's very easy when you have somebody who's already been there and done that to see point A, point B, and then break it down. You know, that's what's so great about mentors, is to be able to just break stuff down into very easy steps. So, and I've learned, you know, as a consultant, everybody has different degrees of inhibition. You know, whether it's motivation, and I'm not really talking motivation as much as inhibition now. Some people, you know, real small steps to them are big. Well, I can't violate that. That's real to them. And then some people, you can go fast and hard. So knowing yourself, are you the person that needs to go real slow? Because if you're that type of person and you try to go too big, you're ensuring failure. You're ensuring failure. Okay, so that's how easy it is. You know, we're talking about chiropractic, but this is everything. I mean, I mentioned here, you know, I wanted to learn how to sail, as an example. So what did I do? Well, first I decided I wanted to do it. I wrote it down. I put a timeline on it. I bought a sailboat. Did I know how to sail when I bought that sailboat? No. What did I do? I have a much higher paradigm now than I did 30 years ago. I can do things at grand scales because my paradigm is so big after having lived so much of life. So I bought a sailboat, a 34-foot sailboat. Did I know how to sail it? No, because that didn't matter. What mattered was I hired a mentor to come on my sailboat and teach me to where I physically had to do it. So I had somebody who knew how to do it, and then he was telling me to where I had to do it, not just read a book about it. And that becomes unbelievably important. And that's how I learned how to sail. I didn't say, well, I don't know how to sail, I better not buy a sailboat. Okay. Number 6, visual. Unbelievably important to create a visual. How we communicate. Remember, how we communicate. 7% of how we communicate is visual, 36% is tone, 55% of how we communicate is visual. Unbelievable. Visual is unbelievably important. If you see it, you will believe it. This is why TV beat radio. Post to it daily. So here's an example. I'll share a couple stories with you with visual. One is, I remember watching Risky Business back in the 80s, if you've ever seen that movie. Well, Tom Cruise gets on his dad's Porsche, and it slides right onto the dock. And right at the last minute, the Porsche, it's a 928 S4 Porsche, and drops into the water. Anyway, back in 1984, a 928 S4 Porsche was like a spaceship. It was just, for a young male, this was like, this is a phenomenon, you know. So it was one of these testosterone, macho male things. I'm like, well, as soon as I saw that movie, I wanted a 920. I said, eventually one day, I'm going to have a 928 S4. So I did. Moved along, it was part of my list. Didn't happen in the first year, second year, but within 3-4 years, I'm driving a red 928 S4 Porsche. Okay. Associate doctor poster boards. So what did I do? When I was training associate doctors and opening offices, I knew how powerful all these concepts were. So one of the things, now I will tell you, my average doctor that I trained and opened, 1 year later, averaged 220 patient visits a week. Now you go, well, how, if you don't know normal, you don't know what that is. The average chiropractic office, after 14 years in practice, sees 107 visits a week, 107. Well, within 1 year, my doctors that were trained were seeing twice as many as doctors that had been in the field for 14 years. In other words, we had this huge success rate, okay? One of the reasons, there's many reasons why, all of these things that I'm going over right now is what I applied. When I trained all the doctors, these are all the things I applied. Micro steps, goals, reverse engineering, all of this stuff. One of the things we did is we'd have them write a poster. We'd get a poster board. Now these are young doctors that are starting out in life, so they typically wanted a nice house and a car and a vacation, that kind of stuff. So we had them on the poster board. They had to put the house that they wanted. They had to put the exact house, not a house. They had to put the exact house. They had to put the exact color. They had to put the exact windows. It had to be, see, in other words, we were making it real. So we did that with everything. So we had these poster boards that we made, and they were all of their dreams, but it was exactly what they wanted: the color, the shape, the sizes. Same with the car. Same with the vacations. You know, we go, what car you want, what vacation you want, what home do you want. We had them. It was all on that poster. What is most important to you and your wife? And it was unbelievably specific, and it had to be on that board. And that's what we did at graduation. So we had a graduation for everybody, and we would go over that poster board, number one. Well, they had to put it up in their office, so they had to see it every day. I had them post it in their office, so they had to see it every day. And then we reverse engineered. How were they going to get that? Well, how much money were they going to need to get that? Well, what was your overhead? So we just reversed engineered everything that told us how many new patients we'd get, what the dollar per visit would be, what the patient retention would be, to how many new patients we'd need relative to our overhead. And then we go, okay, this is the number of new patients to make it all work. And then we go, okay, where are we going to get these new patients? And then we matched them with the marketing programs. And that was exactly what we did every day, every week. That was the time. And that's how we went from 0 to 222 patient visits a week in a year, more than double the national average after 14 years. That's how it's done. It works. When you follow the formula, it's scary how fast it works. Visualization, unbelievable. Writing it down, unbelievably important. Being specific with what you want, unbelievably important. You don't have something specific, it's not going to happen. You don't write it down, it's not going to happen. You don't have a visual, it's not going to happen. Number 7 is verbal. Now this is a little off the chart here. I'm going to share with you a personal story here, but how I believe how effectively it is and how well it works. Verbal. So you want to say your goal out loud daily. Why? What does that do? What effect does that have? Well, let me share with you what I've learned. It's hard not to follow your goal when you say it daily. It's unbelievably hard not to have focus. You know, I say, what do the Muslims do? If you were to bow down 5 times a day and say your goals, whatever they were, do you know how hard it would be not to attain your goals? It'd be unbelievably difficult. You talk about the focus that generates. You talk about the conviction that generates. Unbelievably strong. So if you haven't heard yet, let me introduce you to the concept, the book called Psycho-Cybernetics. And the short of it is in our brain we have something called, in the limbic system, we have something called the reticular activating system. And what that is it stimulates the conscious and subconscious direction and actions. In other words, whatever we tell ourselves consciously and subconsciously, that's what we'll naturally do and go. So it's so unbelievably important what you tell yourself and how you see yourself. So if you don't see yourself as successful and you don't tell yourself into success, you've got like a 0 chance of whatever that definition of success is for you. And so essentially what does happen is people see themselves. You know, if you look at the Harley Davidson driver, the motorcycle guy, and he's got all the tattoos and the big hair and all that, he sees himself as that. Somebody else may go, oh no, I mean, he's a tough guy, he's a criminal or whatever. But that's what he sees himself, and that's who he became. No different than the CEO. That's who he saw himself as, and that's who he became. Well, this is why imprinting is so important, but if you don't have imprinting, and most people don't. I was very fortunate that I'm running now around the house when I'm 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, listening to Zig Ziglar in the background in my subconscious saying, yeah, I can do anything. But that's not how most people were raised. So one of the things is say the goal out loud daily. It has phenomenal, and I'm going to share with you a couple personal stories in how I use this, and I still use it today. It's unbelievably powerful. And so this reticular activating system, and by the way, if you've heard of the movie they made about 10, 15 years ago called Secrets, well, that's what it is. It's basically you can talk yourself into success, and it's true. Whatever you say to yourself repetitively is the direction and the steps and the decisions you will make that will eventually take you in that direction. That is true. So there's something called the reticular activating system that essentially consciously and subconsciously moves your decision making in the different directions of whatever it is you're visualizing and seeing for yourself. So as an example, one of the things that I did is I committed to family to become a chiropractor. So I didn't know what it took to become a chiropractor, and I was an average student. So I didn't want to say that I wanted to be a chiropractor because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I started doing more and more research and what it took and the curriculum and this and that. And then I remember going to the school and visiting, and so I kept following the path, getting more and more information. And then finally I remember coming home after Veterans Day of 1983, sitting at the dinner table Sunday night, and I announced to my parents that I was going to be a chiropractor. That was a huge step because that was putting my back against the wall. And that's what needed to happen. So that's an example. So I use social fear and fear of failure. I'll give you another example is when I was going through school, again, I was a very average student. Again, I was more into sports than academics. So I wasn't sure I'd be able to handle the academic load of going to, taking 27 credit hours a semester and full-time college student, grad student. So I knew I didn't have a lot of talent, but what I did have was persistence and determination. And so I wrote on a 3x5 card, and it said, persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. And what did that mean? It meant it didn't matter that I wasn't the valedictorian. It didn't matter that I didn't have talent. What mattered is if I had persistence and determination, I would overcome anything. So I sat and studied probably twice as long as I did the average student. But I was willing to do it, and I did it, and I knew I had to do it because I didn't come from an academic background. I was playing sports all the way through. So I would sit every night, every day when I got back from college, that was right in front of my desk, and I would say that out loud 3 or 4 times. Persistence and determination alone is omnipotent. Persistence and determination alone is omnipotent. In other words, I was telling myself I could do it. I can overcome it. I can do it. Unbelievable. Because if you can't tell yourself you can do it, nobody else is, and you won't be able to do it. The first person that has to tell themselves they can do it is you. So I'll share with you one other personal, and this is a personal story. The other thing that I would do is I'd get out of the shower and I'd look in the mirror. And in the mirror, my name is Paul Richard Holland, so I used to call myself Rich. They'd call me Richard when I was a kid. So I'd look in the mirror and I'd say, you can do it, you shall do it, you will do it. Just like that. I'd point my finger at myself. You can do it, you shall do it, you will do it. You can do it, you shall do it, you will do it. And it was just like that. And it was like 4, 5, 6 times with intensity like that. Just strictly, I was literally looking myself in the eye, saying, you're going to do it, damn it. I was telling myself I'm going to do it. I was going to go around you, over you, through you, under you. It didn't matter. I was going to go do it. Unbelievably powerful techniques. Number 7 is verbal. Number 8, there's got to be rewards. You have to have micro rewards before the end reward. Of course, there's the end reward, whatever that is. But one of the big mistakes is not to have micro. So you need micro steps, but you have to have micro rewards. There's got to be periodically a little justification, satisfaction to help keep and sustain the motivation and not get burnt out. I'll give you another example. My single best, most profitable year in practice, I took the most vacation time. In other words, I hit it hard. It was every 9 weeks, I took off Wednesday through Sunday, every 9 weeks. So essentially it was like every 2 months I took off 4 days. I'd work till Wednesday night. I'd do a direct flight somewhere. I always did a direct flight so it would save basically a day of traveling. So Wednesday night I'd take off, fly, direct flight, usually south somewhere, go scuba diving or something. And then I'd fly back Monday. So I'd only really miss 1 full day. It was the easiest way to take, and I did that every 9 weeks. So I took a lot of it, and then I took 2 10-day vacations. 7-day vacations pretty good. Now the 10-day vacations I went to Europe because you lose 2 days going overseas. So I took 2 10-day vacations, and essentially every 2 months, 4 days off. I made the most money that year. Why? Because I wasn't burnt out. So I would hit it hard for the micro steps, and then I'd take a rest, and then I would give myself a reward to help energize my batteries. So it's unbelievably important when you take these micro steps and you do attain something, give yourself a little micro reward. Doesn't matter if it's tickets to your favorite event. Maybe you want Broadway tickets. Maybe you want tickets to your local sporting event. Maybe it's a short vacation. Maybe it's a particular holiday. Look at your goals and some of the little goals that you want, some of the little things you want. Go, well, yeah, these can be some micro rewards for this big reward, see? So again, like hiring associate doctors. I want to learn how to hire, train, and manage associate doctors, which is definitely a knowledge and skill-based thing. Well, that's a whole system, to be able to do that. And so to take steps along the way till you're like, yeah, I know how to interview, hire, train, and manage associate doctors to make it work for them and me, to make it work. Well, that takes steps. Well, again, when you do these micro steps, give yourself a little reward. Too many times I'll have doctors say, oh, that's okay. I'm like, no, let me tell you, taking those micro steps, getting micro rewards, getting that pat on the back or regenerating your batteries is unbelievably important. You will burn out. If it's doing nothing but going forward, you will burn out. I see so many chiropractors burn out because they don't even take vacations. Chiropractors have a real high burnout rate 10, 15 years later. Don't even want to practice. Why? Because they didn't take vacations. Why? Because they didn't have associate doctors. They didn't want to take the time off to lose the money and hurt their practice. So it's real common for chiropractors not to take time off, not to take vacations and burn out. And then it affects your whole productivity. Well, here I come back from one vacation. I'm already excited and planning the next one because it's going to be coming around the corner in 9 weeks. So there's all this excitement while I'm moving forward, and then I get a nice reprieve. And then I come back and I'm ready to kick butt again. And that cycle perpetuates. Most productive year ever was the year I took the most time off. I tied it with micro steps. Motivation, unbelievably huge topic, motivation. Major concept, I touched on some of this a little bit. Stronger motivation is to move away from pain than to pleasure. People think going toward pleasure is where it's at. It's not. So there's types of pain. There's physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain. Pleasure and pain is based on self-perception. 5 types of natural motivation. So there's curiosity, future pleasure, future pain, present pleasure, present pain. 80% of everything we do is to get out of present pain. In other words, get our survival and security stable. Emotional security, physical security. That's where overwhelming the energy goes. Then it's into some of the pleasure factors. So overwhelmingly, we will have way more motivation to move away from something painful. And the example that I use, is if you asked 100 people how many wanted to be a millionaire or make $1 million a year, you'd probably have 99 out of 100 say, yeah, I want to be a millionaire. I want to make $1 million a year. And then you go, how many of them are going to do it? Well, not many of them at all. 0.00 whatever one. Why? All of them have the ability to. Well, why don't they do it? Well, there's no motivation. Pleasure is a very weak motivator. That's why. If money was a strong motivator and pleasure was a strong motivator, you'd see a lot more people in the abundance phases of life than survival. Most people, again, if you look at the bank accounts or our paychecks, most people are living on they got 2 months of paychecks before they start having trouble financially. So it's not because they have to, it's because natural motivation is gone. It's just they got out of survival security, and now it challenges the very thing that helped them get to that point, which is security. All of this is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so you can check it out for greater detail. Survival, security, pain-based. Socialization, materialization is pleasure-based. Self-actualization is unstoppable. What are some examples of self-actualization? In other words, doing it for a greater cause. Well, we talked about God, country, your children. You'll do things for your kid, extraordinary things for your kid you would never have done to, help save your kid or something like that. So motivation depends on which stage you perceive yourself. That's an unbelievably important concept. Motivation depends on what stage you perceive yourself. So you could be in a lower phase socioeconomically in survival security, but if you don't perceive yourself that way, it doesn't create any motivation. And I'll give you an example. I've got a friend who's an only child, and he was given everything. So he never had to do anything. So guess where his motivation meter is? Unbelievably low. So it takes an unbelievably low amount of socioeconomics before he actually will get off his butt and do something. Other people, and these are what are called go-getters, 80% of the people I found that once they're out of survival and security, they plateau. And now the inhibiting factor becomes security. You want that security. So it's a great motivator to get it, but once you have it, it becomes a tremendous inhibitor because we want that security, and that stops the majority of people. I found only 20% of the people are what do we call go-getters. And what creates a go-getter? And I found this out through reading a lot of biographies. When you read about all these high achievers, Ted Turner and all these people, and you go into their background, especially if they're honest and open, and you read their biographies, and there's always deep pain-based imprinting in their background. Deep pain-based. So like me, even though I was making $100 or $200 or $300,000 or $500,000 a year or $1 million a year, I didn't see myself as being secure. I was still running because I had pain-based imprinting. I was still trying to get ahead, even though I was way ahead of average. That's what happens with go-getters. They're running from the pain. They're not running to the limo in the pain. I never ran toward my limo. I never pushed toward my plane. I was always running away from the pain, and it just naturally excelled me into more and more and more and more, because I did not perceive myself as being secure at $1 million a year. So it's all based on the individual's perception and reality. Now, the good and bad news about that is most of us don't have pain-based internal motivation. So 80% of us are going to putz out right after we get out of survival and security. That's why these steps become so important now. Having a focus, tying it to a pain-based motivator with micro steps, writing it down, creating visualization. All of these I found are the only way to get out of that. Otherwise, doctors stay at 100, 110, 120 visits a week the rest of their life, living a decent income but not an abundant income, and they still have to go to work the next Monday. So that's a little bit about Maslow's. A matter of fact, just so you know, some of the top businessmen in the world say the #1 business book that they read was Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, because it describes human motivation, and human motivation is what business is. 3 types of natural pain-based motivation, we talked about that. Well, circumstantial pain is no big deal. It's important to that person, but it goes by fast. That's circumstantial, it's temporary, lasts a day or two. So we don't pay a lot of attention to, an example is a flat tire. I go have a flat tire, well, it's important for that hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours. But in the big picture, it's essentially irrelevant. It's essentially a non-motivator. It's just a very small temporary motivator. That's called circumstantial. And then you have what's called external pain. An example would be unexpected housing repair cost over your budget, and it lasts for months, or something like that, or when the stimulus is over. So it could be several months until that particular pain is dissipated. That's external motivation. So that's not very lasting either. As an example, we just hired an employee, and she was highly motivated. Well, it was temporary, circumstantial, because she doesn't have a job. She left her job, so now she needs a job. Well, everything she was saying about motivation was circumstantial and external. And that cannot be confused with internal motivation. Well, as soon as she starts making money, now she's going to go back to her regular decision making. So she'll make a lot more decisions and give a lot more here and there for survival and security, see? So we don't take that into consideration. We're not going to pay attention to circumstantial or short-term external motivation. We're going to pay attention to internal and what we can do. What are the steps we can put in place after you've putzed out? Remember, that's the difficult part. Survival and security is not difficult. It's when people reach survival and security, that's when these steps become unbelievably important. Otherwise, they just don't get it. They just don't go to the next step. So that's a little bit about internal motivation. It's constant regardless of the stage. Always see yourself in pain. You're imprinted as a child. The highest achieving associate doctor that I had went out and failed out of college, actually claimed bankruptcy. Failed. Didn't know anything about business. Then we trained her in all the business. And then she went out in her first year in practice, collected $700,000. And why is that? Well, when you look into her history, her dad was an alcoholic, wasn't able to support the family. They were divorced. She was living with her mom in a trailer, and her mom was on drugs. So she was imprinted with unbelievable survival mechanisms. What she would be willing to do far exceeds the energy. The good news is she didn't divert that energy into drugs and alcohol herself, because that's what most people do. They just numb themselves up. Well, in her case, she used it to get ahead socioeconomically. So she blasted by everybody. That was due to internal pain, is what that was. It wasn't because she wanted a limousine or a car or a 10,000 square foot house, but that's what it led to. So we tie self-actualization or conviction depending on where you are in the socioeconomic ladder. So you see, everybody's different. You got to be aware of where are you, because where you're at is totally different on the steps we would put in place to get you to where you want to go. And number 10 is commitment. You got to make it public to those you love the most. You got to make it public. Public commitment to the love, and not just public, but to your loved ones. That's when you're putting your back against the wall. That's called pain-based motivation, because you don't want to be embarrassed or let them down. I'll give you an example here. I remember I was doing my first triathlon swimming, and I had a tremendous, and most people have trouble with the swimming part on the first triathlon, and just like I did also. And it was everything I could do not to quit. But there was one reason I wasn't going to quit. And I remember this going through my mind in the water. I had published on Facebook to all my friends and family members I was doing to do this triathlon. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to come back and say I didn't finish. That was my thought when I was struggling mightily to try to get out of the water. That was pain motivation. That was commitment to the people that I cared about. Just like when I sat down at my family table, when I announced to my parents with definitive, said, I'm going to be a chiropractor. See, that put me on the spot to the people I cared about the most that I did not want to let down. Unbelievably important. You commit out loud to your loved ones. Huge. Accountability partner. Oh man. I was very fortunate. So I'll give you some examples. good accountability partners if you have a good mentor or something like that. But I'll share with you some examples that happened with someone on a similar, and some of these are very important. Someone on a similar educational level, someone on a similar path, someone you care about, someone who will be able to help in return, somebody that can help create pain of failure, use of social pressure. Social pressure can be a huge motivator, either good or bad. So you have a lot of times people that their social structure will help get them to a certain level, and then they will stay with that same group even though they want to go further, but the group doesn't, so that person will stay. That's why they say you can pick the income of your seven closest friends, and that's what your income will be. Well, some people have a hard time letting go now, so they are at this level. Well, they don't let go. Well, these are the influencers now that are keeping them at that level. So to get to another level, you have to have a higher level of input. And that doesn't happen a lot of times. Common mistakes when the wife does not care or know about the business. That's a big mistake because there's no accountability. That's a big mistake. One of the things that I did to help create accountability and motivation is I educated the wife on statistics and what created these statistics. So the husband couldn't come home and do rationalization and justification. That was one of the best things I did to help motivate the doctors. They couldn't come home and tell their wife crap. Someone who cannot relate to your level of awareness, that's not good. Someone significantly lower in their life, lower meaning social, economic, educationally than where you're wanting to go. Other chiropractors not on a journey of success. That's very common. I remember I started in my practice with about 5 other chiropractors, and we all met at the meetings and saw each other and this and that. And next thing you know, they're falling by the wayside. And then there was one other guy that he was single, and I was single at the time, and he kept pushing. So we started going to seminars together. And so we fed off each other. We kept pushing each other. So the other 3 chiropractors, they just saw 100, 120 visits a week, had a good life, and that was it. Well, him and I kept going. And then eventually he tapered off. And then I kept going. Well, I had to let them all go, and I had to take on new friends who had bigger ideas, bigger concepts, grander vision to be able to go there. Because there was no way I was going to get there hanging around the same mentality. There's no way. So these are difficult decisions. And most of the time, they're not even conscious decisions. You just get comfort. You just get in your comfort zone. That's what happens. So here's an example, learning and practice, Dr. Craig. One of my friends, Dr. here, he was a sounding board. So every time, he was the opposite of me. So every time I thought of this business decision, and he was business minded, I'd always use him as a sounding board. And he kind of does that with me. We kind of check. It's a way of checking each other. Where are we going? Does it make sense? Does this sound right? But he was business backgrounded also. So started a practice same time and grew together. So this other doctor I was telling you about, we grew together. Well, we'd have dinner 3 times a week because we were single. We talked on the phone every day. We had dinner 3 times a week. We went to seminars all the time. We just kind of learned together, and our practices kept skyrocketing and growing and growing and growing. And so we kept on the growth path, and everybody else, we just let go. We just lost contact with them because they weren't on the same path. So to get where you want to go, you do have to be willing to start new relationships to where you want to go, and unfortunately, you do have to be willing to let go or segment those relationships. Just put them in their compartmentalization. Don't let them influence your business. If they're business minded at $200,000 a year, don't listen to their business because they're $200,000 a year. That's one of the rules I have. I never listen to anybody who hasn't done it who has not already done it or is doing it. Because everybody's got an opinion. Only listen to people who are doing what you want to do or go where you want to go or who have done it. They're the ones that are going to get you there the fastest. When I wanted to sail, I didn't go ask somebody who was just learning how to sail to train me how to sail. I went and hired the director of the sailing academy who used to train sailing at West Point. I didn't fool around. And I did it one-on-one. So these are just huge concepts. You know, that's why, you know, in business, it's always good to, you know, to see and get and establish relationships with people where you want to go. That becomes very important. Another example is that there's a doctor that lived up the street, or practiced up the street from me, and we'd have lunch 3 times a week. He was just right up the street. He wasn't a competitor. We was just right up the street. It was the same thing. He was wealth strategies. Well, he retired at age 39. See? So grew too big for chiropractors mentality, moved into the business world. Now segment accountability, partner development on business. So you don't have to leave the relationship, just segment it. I'm not going to listen to somebody who hasn't done it or isn't doing it. I don't care what it is. That's not what I want to hear from you. You know, our relationship could be this, but it's not going to be this. And I'm going to have a conscious awareness because I'm not going to let this keep me down, because it will. 5 minutes. So we're going to another thing here, which is the roles of mentors, which is an example. Like with me, I learned internet marketing. So what did I do? I hired a guy that's big in internet marketing. I knew real estate investing was going to be important. Only, 70% of the millionaires are from real estate investing, not from practicing law, not from optometry, not from dentistry, and not from chiropractic. So I knew if I wanted, there's less than a 30% chance of me having a net worth if I didn't invest in real estate. So what did I do? I hired a mentor to teach me how to invest in real estate. My first $1 million was in real estate, not chiropractic. Same when I talked with you about sailing, same thing. So we talk about the role of mentors. There's 4 stages of learning. There's unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. And this becomes unbelievably important, not just for ourselves. I go by this every day. But also when we train our staff, associate doctors, because this applies to everybody. So this is the way to get from point A to point B. So in unconscious incompetence, the way to get to conscious incompetence, in other words, you know about it, but you can't do it, is book seminars and tapes and experience. That's essentially it. To get from conscious incompetence, in other words, you know about it, but you can't do it or you're not doing it, whether it's new patients, patient retention, how to hire trained associate doctors, whatever it is, everything in life. That's where a mentor is unbelievably important, because they do several things. They hold your hand and they know how to get from point A to point B. First, they know how to get from point A to point B, number 1, because they've done it or they're doing it. Number 2, they know how to do micro steps. In other words, they know pleasure motivation and pain motivation. See, when you know how to get from point A to point B, do micro steps, reverse engineer, create pleasure and pain motivation, it will happen within a timeline. It will happen. That's how you get from conscious incompetence to conscious competence. In other words, you can do it, but you're not very good at it. And of course, where you want to be with whatever task you want to do is conscious competence, unconscious competence. In other words, you don't have to think about it and you just do it. That's when you will be highly successful at whatever that skill set is, that task. Like me. Do I know how to go out and ride a boat? Yes. Do I know how to go sell? Yes. Do I know how to go buy real estate without any money down? Yes. Do I know how to do educational sales and get all kinds of way more new patients than I physically can handle? Yes. Do I know how to get unlimited referrals from attorneys through educational sales? Yes, because all of those skill sets. Do I know how to hire, train, and manage staff? Yes. See, those are all unconscious competence skill sets. So anytime I want to learn something different or new, just like I just got applied for my boat captain's license, I just did the same steps. Micro steps, hired a mentor, micro steps. Everything here is what I did. Created pain and pleasure, and I just moved right through from not knowing anything about getting a captain's license to being qualified for a captain's license, boat captain's license. Just like that. These were the steps right here. So that's what the stages of learning are about, from unconscious incompetence phase, book seminars, to conscious incompetence. We're going to go through that. The worst experience is the worst teacher's experience. I found a lot of people will never even act. They're just dreamers. They're just dreamers. They won't even act. I found once somebody's out of survival and security, 97% of the time, they'll never even act on something. That's what I found. Then when they do act, if they do it through their inexperience, they'll have a 90% negative feedback rate. So what does that do? It makes them quit. Now when they quit, what's the next thing they do? They rationalize and justify. And I'll tell you, in a chiropractic office, what are the two rationalizations that I see chiropractors say routinely when they're not very successful and they don't have a good practice? I'm in an area that doesn't have good insurance. That's a common thing. I go, tell me an area that does have good insurance. Two, they'll say, well, my community is not health-minded. I say, tell me a community that is health-minded that just wants to come and pay you $50, $100 when they're not having any symptoms. Tell me where that exists. Say it doesn't. That's called rationalization, because you have to do that to survive. Otherwise, there'd be enough internal discontent to get out of your comfort zone, challenge your security, and get something else done that's different. That's how that's how the masses stay status quo. Rationalization and justification. So that's the worst teacher's experience, and not taking personal responsibility. That's when I know it's over. When I'm dealing with a client or whenever, and they start blaming, they start doing rationalization and justification. They don't look at their statistics. In other words, what they're really doing, what their real skill level is. That's when I know it's over. There's nothing I can do for that person anymore. Until you take personal responsibility, nothing can be done. Mentors, the 7 steps to conscious competence, owning a skill set. So you find a passion, create an end result, pleasure, which is weak, create a pain-based motivation, which is strong, tie it together, break it into micro steps. This is the formula. Create the timeline, no negative feedback in the learning process, because that'll make you quit and give up. And then you do sensory and motor to create that habit and skill level to get it into conscious competence. From there, all you need to do is repetition with discipline. That is the formula for any stage in life, any knowledge or skill set that you want to get from point A to point B. That's the formula right there. I use it on myself all the time. When I'm not getting things done, that's why they're not getting done. The major components are deficient. And I turn right to it. I accept personal responsibility, and I say, I'm not doing this, this, and this, and that's why it's not getting done. And then when I do put it in place, stuff happens real fast. And so that's exactly what happens with clients when we take them from point A to point B. And that's how we can take these doctors that I put in practice. 52% of them had already failed in practice. I came in and trained them. We put them through all of these steps. To a year later, they're seeing average of 222 patient visits a year, more than twice the national average. This applies to everything in life, and this is exactly what I do. Anything that I do, sailing, boating, airplane, scuba diving, whatever I want to do, that's the formula that I go to, because that's what works. But it's also relative to where I'm at. I'm not in survival and security, but I'm different. I'm one of the go-getters by my history. So I have the deep internal pain-based motivation. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. Well, most people do. 80% of the population does need somebody to hold them accountable. I was just talking to a chiropractor the other day, and he goes, yeah, I'm not doing very well. The good news is he took responsibility. He goes, I could be doing a lot better. I'm putzing around. He goes, I really need somebody to hold my, to put their foot on my throat to keep me accountable. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So anyway, these are how to set you and achieve your goals that will dramatically change your life, your family, and community. And of course, it really helps if you have a partner. If you do this with your wife, you're married and you have a wife that's willing and wanting to go through life and apply these, it's tremendous. If you have somebody who doesn't believe in this and doesn't want to do it, you're going to have one hell of a hard time in life with that partner. And then if you don't have somebody, then you can, like you hire a mentor. Every time I want to do something, I don't pay attention to as much book, seminars, and tapes. I go right to the mentor, because the mentor is going to take me from point A to point B the fastest. They'll cost the most, but I'll get the greatest return the fastest. That's what happens with mentors. And I only hire mentors who have done what I want to do, or they're doing what I want to do. Otherwise, everybody has an opinion. So that's what we do, and this is how we change people's lives. So hopefully this was helpful, but it's things that I've learned in the last 20, 30 years that's been just unbelievably, I've learned from not doing some of these things, correcting them, modifying them, books, seminars, tapes, experience, and I'm like, these are the factors that when you line them up, it's unstoppable. This is unbelievably unstoppable if you just apply them. So hopefully this helped you out.